Hello and most welcome to Heidegger 1722. And we had a break here with our discussions about Wittgenstein and the Bible. Now we probably can say welcome back, Kalle Lundahl, to our discussions. And we will today continue with an attitude towards a soul. Wittgenstein, Other Minds and the Mind by Edmund Dain. And after that one, we will continue with another article that will be presented when the reading of this is finished. We are currently on page 20, second paragraph. And we've been discussing attitudes and contrasted them to opinions. And how they are not justified or unjustified by evidence. They are, so to speak, not contingent. And that makes an incredible difference. Why are they not contingent, one might ask. It is because they directly reflect an intention in oneself, or the attitude is one's posture. Non-negotiable doing, I would say. It makes no room whatsoever for being either false or true. Those aspects simply do not enter. We do not need to have evidence for an attitude. There is no epistemology involved. We just do them. I previously compared an attitude to a brush stroke. It doesn't need proof, deliberation, or any of those things. It is just something that you do. I continue my reading on page 20, second paragraph. But attitudes are not like opinions, and they are not justified or unjustified by certain evidence in the way that opinions are. The demand for evidence that could support such a belief belongs to an understanding of what belief involves that is not applicable in this kind of case. In the case of our recognizing another person as another person, given what belief amounts to here, an opinion might or might not be justified in the light of the evidence available. But our attitudes are a matter of our concepts and the footholds they find. And there is no justifying our concepts themselves by appeal to the evidence in anything like the way in which one can justify an opinion. Our concepts are already at work in our understanding of what the facts are, so there can be no justifying them by appeal to those facts. The idea that our attitudes and the concepts they involve could be justified is the idea that we could put aside the grammar of the language that we are used to understand the world and identify the grammar of the things themselves just as they are. But things do not have any grammar in themselves, just as they are, in the way that idea suggests that they must. If we put aside grammar, we put aside the possibility of understanding all together. There is nothing comparable to the justification of an opinion by means of the evidence in the case of an attitude. Paragraph 7. The mind and consciousness. I have argued that our believing in other minds should be understood on the model of an attitude rather than an opinion. And that doing so, understanding our believing in other minds this way undermines one of the central premises of the traditional problem of other minds. That problem challenges us to identify something, anything at all, that could serve as adequate, adequate, adequate evidence for our belief in other minds. And in doing so, it misconstrues the nature of our belief in this kind of case. Our belief in other minds is a matter of our attitudes, not opinions. and our attitudes are not related to evidence in the way that opinions are, as that problem presupposes thinking of belief in other minds in terms of attitudes in this kind of way then can help us to see that the problem of justifying such a belief arises because we misconstrue what a belief amounts to here. In the case of belief in other minds, the picture of the mind or the soul that is involved in the kind of account I have been developing is of course very different from the predominant picture of what the mind is or what it is to have a mind. On that picture, the mind is not internally related to our attitude towards another human being in the way that I have been suggesting. Rather, what it is for another human being to have a mind is a matter of the properties of that being, independent of what we think or say or do in relation to them. And the question is whether other beings have or lack a certain property. The property of consciousness, and whether any evidence could ever justify us in our belief that they do have it. I have been trying to suggest that the understanding of the problem and the picture of the mind that goes along with it radically misconstrues the kind of thing that is involved in our believing in other minds, insofar as we believe in other minds at all. The kind of thing that make it so very natural to us to say that other human beings have minds or souls, are conscious beings and not automata, or that we believe they do, and that as a result it radically misconstrues what is ascribed to another human being in saying that they have a mind or a soul. And the kinds of question that arise in connection with that. But an alternative, property-based conception of what it is for a human being to have a mind also, in my view, renders the concept of consciousness itself completely irrelevant, divorced as it is from any of the footholds in the behavior of other beings that give our actions and concepts the purchase they require. A possibility that such beings might, despite everything, nevertheless lack consciousness, only serves to highlight the peculiarity of the conception of consciousness that is involved in this picture of the mind. And how unrelated it is to the concerns that lie behind our thinking of other human beings as conscious beings. As Wittgenstein writes, say to yourself, for example, the children over there are mere automata. All their liveliness, all their liveliness is mere automatism, and you will either find these words becoming quite empty, or you will produce in yourself some kind of uncanny feeling or something of the sort. I will go back to look at some quotes here. If we put aside grammar we find on page 20, we put aside the possibility of understanding altogether. If we don't see the rules, we will also lack the possibility of understanding altogether. It's all stemming from the grammar. And if we try to replace grammar by different sorts of add-ons, like justification, facts, introspection, and so forth, we will not be able to enter into understanding. To have justification for an opinion simply will not make up for any of the complexities, forces, and delineations that the rules give. I finished off the text and I'm now looking at quotes. I will just continue with the quotes for a while before we go to aspect blindness. Could we go to the previous text, please, Kalle? On page 21, we find the following. The second paragraph on that page. The picture of the mind or the soul that is involved in the kind of account I have been developing is of course very different from the predominant picture of what the mind is, or of what it is to have a mind. And here it's so good. On that picture, the mind is not internally related to our attitude towards another human being in the way I have been suggesting. Rather, what it is for another human being to have a mind is a matter of the properties of that being, independent of what we think or say or do in relation to them. And the question is whether other beings have or lack a certain property of consciousness. And whatever any evidence could ever justify us in our belief that they do have it. And here is the kernel of it, definitely. The common idea of mind as a sort of add-on to everything else makes it completely redundant. And no wonder that great philosophers like Daniel Dennett have decided to erase it completely. No, mind is the interaction with the rest of the outer, together with the inner. And I would say that makes mind incredibly real, so real that it doesn't even have to have any proof. That would be absolutely redundant. like adding another cart to a horse that already has a cart. The mind is all the interactions, all the rules in the language game being followed, and that gives the mind an enormous substance to it because it's in on every interaction, cannot even be hidden. It's participatory, and rules are participation. Rules are the evidence that a participation is going on. Mind is not a property, neither is it a thing that can be pointed to, have a proof. And it makes no sense whatsoever to question it. That finished my go through, and we can go on to the next text. Maybe Kalle, you want to have?
I was thinking, Hans, do you hear
Yes,
me?
I hear you.
Of the word concept that they uses very often, and it's, I don't know, because it sounds very not part of continental philosophy, but of analytical philosophy. Things are concepts, some what do you think? Is concepts a thing that we should use? Is it a term that we should use, Hans?
You can replace concept with a collection of words to make it easier, but I see what you mean, yes. But a conglomerate of words.
It was an interesting paper. We discussed many things here, like the soul, and here I didn't agree with Wittgenstein, and it was a relation. No, I will not repeat my points here, but it was, and we also discussed the Chinese room together in context with this text by Dain, and it gave many insights, so I'm grateful that we went through this paper. I will not add anything here. My comment off minutes. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, I'd say it's an important paper, and I'd be happy to say also that I established contact with Edmund Dain. And he's very willing to help. And of course, the matter of the soul and other minds are incredibly pertinent now when we have AI, and I say the absolute majority of people do believe that some sort of evidence for a soul is needed, which of course makes the soul an unnecessary add-on, supplement of sort. You can have it or you can take it away. And since It's not participatory, it lacks all sort of substance or reality to it.
Mm. Yes, finishing quotation from Wittgenstein is excellent about the children. And we can compare it with if you go to a doctor and he checks your knee and he seems to think that we are like robots. We react to pain. Perhaps we are a little bit more than robots, but we don't have any soul. We only react automatically to things, passively.
Yeah.
But if you look at children, we see that it's, it's ridiculous to say to use that argumentation also for children. Mm.
I do agree. It becomes uncanny and scary even. And I'm quite certain that the changes we've seen the last couple of centuries are caused by this confusion.
Mm. Well, let me thank you and Wittgenstein and Edmund Dain for this second paper that we went through by Edmund Dain. So let's go to the other thing. I will close this with your permission.
The second paper is Wittgenstein on aspect blindness and meaning blindness by Ohad, Nachtomy, and Andreas Blank. Who follows a rule has formed a new concept. For a new rule is a new way of seeing things. It is, in contrast to Köhler, just meaning that I see. I think we can have the text a little bit larger. Wittgenstein's remarks on meaning blindness in his writings on the philosophy of psychology from the late 1940s are one of the most intriguing themes in his philosophy. It is no wonder that they have bewildered his commentators for a long time. Did Wittgenstein conceive of meaning blindness as a genuinely possible psychological state, comparable to other mental impairments. Or did he use meaning blindness as a thought experiment, a logically possible scenario designed to clarify some of our intuitions concerning the concept of meaning and the role experience plays in it, or the lack thereof? Are these remarks mere curious marginalia, or do they form an essential part of his view of meaning? It is not easy to decide these questions. The question we propose to take up here, however, is a more modest one. How did Wittgenstein conceive of the relation between aspect blindness and meaning blindness? There are a number of places where Wittgenstein says, or at least implies, that an aspect blind person would be meaning blind. The connection between meaning blindness and aspect blindness is particularly visible in Wittgenstein's writings on the philosophy of psychology. However, the full ramifications on this connection become more apparent when they are considered against Wittgenstein's discussion of aspect seeing and understanding meaning in his notes from the 1930s and early 1940s. In what follows, we shall attempt to recover some background remarks that help understanding Wittgenstein's later remarks. With respect to the connection between aspect seeing and forming concepts, we will also draw a material from the remarks on the foundations of mathematics. And with respect to the connection between aspect seeing and following rules, we will consider some little known passages from Wittgenstein's manuscripts from the 1940s. Discussion on Wittgenstein's views on meaning blindness and aspect blindness is quite extensive in recent literature. The interpretation we present here develops Mulhall's reading regarding the scope of aspect perception. Although we make important qualifications to his reading, our own work on the relation between aspect seeing and concept formation, and our previous suggestion that rule following presupposes a capacity to see aspect. So that an aspect blind person would be unable to follow rules, as well as Barelli's reading of the connection between aspects perception and meaning blindness. We shall advance the following thesis. If aspect seeing is required for following rules, and hence for using language, we have a straightforward explanation of why Wittgenstein believes that aspect blindness would imply meaning blindness. We argue for this thesis in 3 steps. 1. We first argue that the scope of aspect seeing is far broader than usually thought, and that much of our normal language-related seeing involves aspect seeing, so that an aspect blind person would lack something essential for seeing and perceiving the meaning of words and signs, and hence aptly is called meaning blind. 2. In the second step, we argue that aspect seeing plays an important role in language acquisition and concept formation. 3. In the third step, we argue that aspect seeing plays an essential role in rule following, a practice which is clearly fundamental to Wittgenstein's view of language use, and hence to his view of meaning as the use of language. We freely admit that on all these points, Wittgenstein's texts are far from decisive. On the other hand, that Wittgenstein calls an aspect blind person a meaning blind is beyond any doubt. This identification begs for an explanation. Our three claims in this paper regarding the scope of aspect seeing, that aspect seeing is required for language acquisition and for rule following, are admittedly not conclusive, but they provide such an explanation. The paper's additional contribution consists in showing that our reading is supported by some passages from Wittgenstein's unpublished manuscripts. Some of these texts are virtually absent from recent literature on this topic. Considering these texts, which are admittedly difficult, would contribute to a fuller understanding of the intrinsic and non-trivial connection Wittgenstein saw between aspect blindness and meaning blindness. And if you hold the paper, I will now go to some quotes here. So aspect seeing, or aspect blindness, which is referred to here as well, is deeply connected to being able to see different sides of a word. One could say it's in sharp contrast to monosemic take. And do think of the different ambigrams that Wittgenstein are using for further ground the idea that there are an abundancy of aspects in language, and that meaning itself stems from aspects. One way to explain this is think about a person you know, maybe not very well, but an acquaintance. That person you will always see from different aspects. You will not have the same visual on him one single time. Direction, angle, force, in what sense you are conscious. Factors as how he looked that particular day. We all look different, radically different. That's proven by, for instance, neurophotography. We would not be able to see all those aspects if we were monosemic than anything other than different people. We wouldn't have one person. And aspect seeing is getting the aspects to one. In that respect, it's very important. For without it, we wouldn't recognize anything in the world. And we will be literally meaning blind. Aspect is also deeply connected to rules. because without rules, we wouldn't have, as we went through the last paper, Edmund Dain, we wouldn't have access to understand that human beings are soulful beings. Or things like color or shapes, they all follow a rule and cannot be directly monosemically perceived, just taken in. We all need different aspects. I'll say one of the best examples is from mathematics, and looking at a whole series of numbers that have a pattern to them. Only change in aspect can make us understand, oh, those reoccurring numbers are following a rule. That's exactly how words and concepts are formed, and how we can be understood at all, or understand. So there is a lot at play here. And I would say we touched on aspect with the DCCT, the coin with Caesar Flavius, the son of Domitian, on one side, and the Emperor Domitian himself on the other. We see a coin, but it is at the same time impossible other than to see just one side of the coin. It can maybe twist it so you can see half, but that's about what you can do. Oh, thank you. Here we have the coin. But still, the fact is that we directly perceive the coin, not a thing with two sides. We see it as one singular unit, nothing else. And that's thanks to aspect seeing. We sort of, and I know putting my fingers in quotation marks, we are seeing the rule of what it is to be a coin. The coin has those rules, as a soul has certain rules. And aspect is the recognition of that. We have also touched on a more fundamental way of looking at time with Julian Barber, where past and future are aspects, not mysterious temporal things, but they are different aspects of what something we could call time. Not necessarily we have to call it time, because that rids some of the aspect understanding, but this is still what we do with due reason to it. Kalle, it's early on in this paper, but maybe you have some comments.
Well, we could use this coin as an example again. You could see, I think the author of this paper, Sang-Wan Lee, sees this almost like a painting with one side, because he never ever mentions the other side. And that I would say is aspect blindness. No, I don't want to be mean, but it's like that with words. Dictionaries give one meaning to one meaning to one word
Yes.
in one particular passage, and that's aspect blindness. Meanings are not stable either. So absolutely, it's like a coin. I think it's a good word, a way of comparing words to coins. Like the word coin, for instance. You should remember that it has two sides. And coin can be a singular one, and it can be it can have a general meaning.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, must true. And it's interesting. I was thinking on neurology. The authors of the paper we're reading now, Ohad and Andreas, are also mentioning neurology, and there are people who are suffering from prognosia, which is inability to recognize faces. And it seems that those people are actually aspect blind. Prosopagnosia, face blindness, it's called in neurology.
Mm.
And this also makes it impossible to think of language as monosemic. We only can call language or words monosemic once we establish through aspect meanings, and then we sort of forget what we did earlier on, which is quite natural because it's a complicated process. And then we think to ourselves, well, I only need to see one side of the coin to know it's a coin, which is not true. It could be flat, it could be just a piece of paper.
Yes, and we can also think about famous rabbit and duck example. And it's not a coin, but we could think it as a coin. And
Yeah.
we can flip it around. One perhaps is a rabbit, another is a duck. And more animals we can see there. Okay, we should not exaggerate, but I think it gives more richness to your life world, so to say.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And if you even can see there are hair, that's even better, a third animal. Not only a rabbit and duck, but the hair, however, it makes it more intriguing.
Yes, you get many aspects, and I now reckon how we need aspects. They seem so, to the monosemic bunch, aspects seems even dangerous, but they're actually what makes possible to have one singular thing. So exactly what the monosemics are trying to sort of defend, they lose.
Mm. Well, perhaps we should end there.
Yeah, it was great. It was fun to be back again. Thank
Yes,
you very
indeed.
much, Kalle. And I will end the recording here. Thank you everyone for listening. Have a pleasant morning, day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Bye bye for now.